Welcome back. So far we've focused on the two sides in this conflict, but there are important sideline players to consider as well, particularly if you're going to talk about the future in Gaza. One of those sides, as always, the United States, but Europe's also taken a leading role this time, urging a massive international effort to end the 61-year-old conflict. 6 European leaders visited the Middle East on Sunday. They attended a summit with the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. They also met the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. The European visitors were critical of Israel's offensive, but they also spoke strongly in defence of Israel's right to protect its citizens from Palestinian rockets. They called for rapid action to assist the wounded and homeless in Gaza, including the opening of the border crossings from Israel and Egypt, but also concluded the supply of arms by sea and land to the Gaza Strip must stop. And on that note, there was also a major play by the United States to see that Hamas and the other Palestinian factions are not rearmed. While the UN resolutions and Arab initiatives took weeks to produce, the US quickly signed a far-reaching agreement with Israel on Friday aimed at stopping the smuggling of weapons into Gaza. Now, this agreement would step up intelligence cooperation between Israel and the United States, while suggesting closer cooperation with NATO partners as well. It also proposes to police the water routes by which arms might reach Gaza, including patrols in the Gulf. That, in particular, is aimed at stopping potential arms supply from Iran. In fact, Iran explicitly mentioned in this deal. The agreement even states that international sanctions against Iran should be enhanced. And the agreement clearly focuses on Israel's security interests. Palestinian security, arms supply for Israel, apparently not an issue. Taiza Khalid, a senior member of the PLO, has called the deal, I'm quoting here, a reward for Israel's onslaught and violations of international law, and an attempt to engage the world in a wide-scale war under the pretext of barring smuggled weapons into Gaza. Still with us, our guests in Beirut is Alistair Crook, in Tel Aviv, Dan Shufton, and in Doha, Abdul Bariatwan. Alistair Crook, I'll come back to you. What do you make of that statement there? In fact, a reward for Israel for 3 weeks of war.
Well, I think one does have to look at why the tunnels exist. And I think the reasons the tunnels existed was basically because the Palestinians of Gaza were being besieged. And it was not surprising, therefore, that they dug their way out of the prison during this period. But I think that what the Europeans are saying sounds ominously like the attempt to try and put back some of the building blocks for a tighter siege. And if this is the case, I think that this is going to be a regressive move, because really a basis for any settlement, a basis for, if you like, the end of the rocket fire, will only come from a real opening of the crossings. That has been the Hamas position and the resistance position throughout. And it is quite clear, only when the people of Gaza have a chance to live a normal life will there be a possibility to come to some understandings on this. That does not mean just trickling in aid from time to time for the minimal amount of calories to come in to keep life alive, but a proper opening of the crossings. And I think it's been very worrying to hear equally that the Europeans are not approaching it from that. At least the first statements by the European spokesman seem to talk about the need to try and, if you like, relaunch Abu Mazen, President Abbas, again on the basis of rebuilding Gaza, which suggests, again, it's all about hollowing out Hamas as a political entity, rather than actually trying to deal with the situation and move towards unity, a real unity of the Palestinian people.
Just to go back to the idea of the tunnels that you were saying, the idea of why they exist, why they are there in the first place is obviously because of the siege. But when we're looking specifically at weapons, another quote here from the Al-Qassam brigades who say, do whatever you want, we know how to acquire weapons. Is that true? I mean, regardless of what happens with the tunnels, is Hamas and the other factions always going to be able to acquire weapons?
Yes, I think it's true. It may become a little bit more difficult or not. But don't forget, I mean, as everyone complains about the weapons that came to Hamas during this period, we have to recall also that in the Israeli press, the officials, defense officials, are quite open in saying that they were preparing and they were planning and arming and acquiring new weapons from United States even before this last ceasefire was arranged, in order to prepare for the attack that we have just seen taking place in the last 22 days. So if Hamas has been weaponizing, it's no less the case that Israel has been weaponizing.
Right, so
but
let's
no one
put that
proposes
then.
that there should be some equity in this.
Right, so let me put that then to Dan Shufton in Tel Aviv. Why should the United States be deciding who gets armed and who doesn't get armed in the region? And as Alistair Crook says, Israel is clearly being armed by an outside force as well.
But the question is ridiculous. You assume that if you arm the police, you also have to arm the murderers and the rapists. Remember, what you have is a terrorist organization. This is recognized not only by Israel and by the United States, but also by the European Union. We are speaking about a barbaric organization dedicated to the destruction of others, speaking about the obliteration of others, openly saying that it wants to destroy Israel. It's not only anti-Israel, it's also anti-Jewish, it's also anti-Semitic. It is based in its covenant on the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So the idea that you should arm Bader Meinhof because the police in Europe is getting more arms is ridiculous. And the whole, I agree with you that what we have here is Israel being rewarded by Europe, and this is the significance of what happened when all the major states in Europe sent their representatives to Jerusalem, while Hamas was isolated in Doha with Iran, with Syria, and because they needed also a comic relief, they brought this clown from Venezuela, Chavez. So what you have here is everybody in the world except the most radical, Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Chavez. Everybody else in the world came to Sharm el-Sheikh and to Jerusalem because they realized, everybody, including the majority of the Arab world, that what you have in the Gaza Strip is not a legitimate element. The legitimate Palestinian element is the Palestinian government and Abu Mazen. And what you have in the Gaza Strip are people who are cruel to their own people. When you have, even during the war, Israel letting through humanitarian supplies, they hijack the humanitarian supplies so that the people don't get it. When they get fuel, they keep it and they don't let it be used for the benefit of the population.
Okay, then
we're
going slightly off track
is
there.
Profoundly flawed.
We're going slightly off track there, and I actually want to pick up on a point that you did make and put it to Abdul Bari Atwan. Abdul Bari, Dan Shufton showing us the split there, if you like, between who's supporting who in the international community. Does it concern you the way the Europeans have come in now and have seemingly put their stake in the ground like that, and it is isolating once again Hamas?
Well, first, I am really shocked and surprised by the way this propaganda is presented, which is extremely degrading and misleading. Terrorism, who is actually terrorizing the people in Gaza, who are killing at least 450 children, who actually destroyed more than 4,000 houses over the head of the people who were living there. Terrorism, this is the worst type of terrorism we ever seen in our part of the world by the Israelis.
Regardless of that, the politics, if you wouldn't mind, because we're running short on time.
No, please, let me complete. You know, I am at the receiving end. My family are massacred in Gaza by the Israelis, so I am entitled to respond to this kind of cheapest propaganda. You know, the other point I would like to refer to, it seems the Israeli and some part of the international community is still believing that the military solutions is the only solution for this conflict. That's why this conflict is going on for the last 100 years. I think the European are rewarding the Israelis. The American are rewarding the Israeli for their massacres in Gaza Strip. They turn Gaza Strip to a concentration camp. Even worse than that, because concentration camps were not bombed from air, from sea, from grounds. So if we want a solution, we have to go to the basics again. Why those people are resisting the occupations? Simply because border crossing are sealed, because people are starving, because the Israeli actually undermined the moderate Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas when they actually failed him completely, killed the peace process, turned the life of the people in the West Bank miserable, as we see with about 630 checkpoints and with the settlements mushrooming there, eating the Palestinian land.
In short, can Europe make a difference?
We can make a difference. We have to go back to the peace process. We have to go and see who is actually blocked this peace peace process and who is actually helping it, who is the moderate and who is the radicals, who are the terrorists and who are the people who want their basic rights to come back, who would like a full implementation of international legality, and also the Annapolis peace process, which actually sponsored by the American. So by depriving Hamas from any weapons to defend itself, it means giving a green light to the Israeli to go back again and massacre people in Gaza, collective massacres there, as King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia said in the Arab Summit conferences, so Arab Summit conference in Kuwait. So if the Israeli continue with these kind of attitudes and crushing this, crushing that, smashing this, smashing that, using the support and the cover of the United States to do so, I think the conflict will drag on, and I wouldn't be surprised if other parties in the Middle East are dragged to this conflict, and we will have instability in the whole world.
I'm so sorry to cut you in there, but we really are all out of time here on Inside Story. Thanks to all our guests, Dan Shufton, Abdul Bari Atwan and Alistair Crook. And thank you, our viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story.